The day my brother announced that running our family business was the easiest job in the world, I didn't argue with him. I didn't laugh. I didn't even look offended. I just sat there at the dinner table, cutting into dry roast chicken while he kept talking like he had already won an argument nobody else knew we were having. Because sometimes the best revenge does not start with a fight. Sometimes it starts with silence. Sometimes it starts with giving somebody enough room to prove exactly who they are. And if you are patient enough, they will do the rest for you. Our family owned a small construction company in Ohio called Harrison & Sons Construction. The name sounded bigger than the business really was. We were not some giant regional company with branded trucks all over the state and a polished office full of executives. We had a shop, a few trucks, 12 employees, and a calendar that was always too full in the summer and too empty in the winter. We built decks, installed fences, remodeled kitchens, repaired water damage, replaced flooring, and every now and then took on bigger jobs when the numbers made sense. It was honest work, hard work, the kind of work that lived in your body long after the day was over. You felt it in your shoulders when you woke up, in your knees when you climbed stairs, in your hands when you tried to open a jar at night and realized your fingers were still stiff from carrying lumber all morning. My dad started the company 32 years earlier with one pickup truck, a dented toolbox, and the kind of stubborn pride that makes men believe they can build a life one job at a time. And to be fair, he did. He built the company slowly, carefully, no shortcuts, no investors, no miracle break. Just years of early mornings, late invoices, repeat clients, and word-of-mouth referrals from people who trusted him enough to hand him their house keys. By the time my brother and I were old enough to work, the company was stable, not rich, not flashy, but stable, enough to keep food on the table, the mortgage paid, and my parents convinced that one day the business would stay in the family. My name is Jake Harrison. I'm the younger brother, the quiet one, the dependable one, the one who learned how to carry sheet lumber without dragging the edge before I learned how to solve for X. The one who knew which supplier would answer early, which employee would call in sick the Monday after football season started, and which clients needed extra reassurance before signing a contract. I grew up in that business, not around it, in it. I swept sawdust before school, loaded scrap into dumpsters on weekends, spent summers hauling tools, picking up materials, and learning the difference between people who like to talk about work and people who actually did it. And then there was my brother, Dylan. Dylan is 2 years older than me, and if you asked my parents growing up, Dylan was not just smart, he was special. The kind of special people say with a smile that sounds innocent until you realize they never use that word for you. Dylan was confident, funny, charming, the kind of person who could walk into a room, say 3 sentences, and somehow leave people feeling like he had done more than the guy who had been sweating all day. He had a gift for that, a gift for being admired at a distance. Growing up, Dylan was the kind of kid who got credit for things he never touched. If the lawn was mowed, my dad would stand in the kitchen later and say, "Good job, Dylan. That needed to get done." Meanwhile, I would still have grass clippings stuck to my socks. If the garage got cleaned, my mom would say, "See? Dylan really notices what needs attention." Even if Dylan had spent the afternoon inside with a controller in his hand while I sorted old nails, coiled extension cords, and hauled paint cans to the trash. And the worst part was not even that they praised him. It was that, after a while, they started acting like my work was expected and his effort was exceptional. That kind of thing does something to you over time. Not all at once, slowly, quietly. You stop waiting to be noticed. You stop correcting the record. You learn that some people get rewarded for showing up with confidence, while others get taken for granted because they always show up with results. That was me. I was not the son people bragged about. I was the son people relied on. There's a difference, a big one. One gets applause. The other gets responsibility. And responsibility does not usually come with a trophy. Still, for years, I let it go because I actually liked the work. I liked finishing something real. I liked being able to stand in a backyard at the end of a long day, look at a deck we had just built, and know that it would still be standing years later because I had done it right. There is something satisfying about work you can point to, something clean about it. You either built it or you didn't. You either solved the problem or you didn't. No speeches, no pretending, no branding, just results. Dylan hated that kind of work. By 22, he had already decided manual labor was beneath him. He said things like, "I'm meant for bigger things," usually while horizontal on the couch, wearing clean socks, holding a phone someone else had probably helped him pay for. He tried college for a year and quit. Tried real estate and quit. Spent nearly 2 years finding himself, which apparently required sleeping late, talking big, and borrowing money from our parents with the confidence of a man certain he was temporarily inconvenienced by a world that had failed to recognize his talent. Meanwhile, I kept working every day. Busy season, slow season, rain delays, emergency repairs, nightmare clients, rushed permits, supplier mix-ups, payroll weeks, Saturdays, Sundays, whatever needed doing. I learned the business from the bottom up, not just the construction side. Everything. Scheduling, vendor relationships, cost overruns, payroll timing, client management, permits, crew personalities, change orders, margins, the million little moving parts that turn a small family business into something that either survives or quietly dies. But according to my parents, none of that mattered as much as Dylan's vision. That was the word they loved. Vision. Such a beautiful word when it costs nothing. One Sunday, everything finally came to a head. We were at my parents' house for dinner. Same old setup. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans nobody really wanted, but everybody took anyway because my mom put them on the table. My dad had been talking about the company, saying how busy things were getting. "We've got 3 new contracts starting next month," he said proudly. Before I could even ask which ones had been confirmed, Dylan leaned back in his chair and laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not a confused laugh. The kind of laugh someone gives when they think everybody else has been overcomplicating something obvious. "I still don't understand why you all act like running that company is so hard," he said. The table went quiet. My dad frowned. "What do you mean?" Dylan shrugged and took a sip of water like he was about to explain basic math to children. "It's just construction. You hire guys, take contracts, collect money. That's it." He waved his fork around the room. "It's not rocket science." I slowly set my glass down, not because I was angry, because I knew that tone. That was Dylan at his most dangerous. Not because he was smart, because he was certain, and certainty in someone who has never carried the weight is a very expensive thing. My dad gave a small, awkward chuckle. "Well, there's a little more to it than that." But Dylan was rolling now. "No, seriously. If I ran the company, I could double the profits in a year." My mom looked impressed. Actually impressed. "You really think so?" "Of course," he said. Then he looked straight at me. And with that lazy, confident smile he had worn since childhood, he said, I mean, Jake basically just does the labor part. That sentence sat in the air like a slap, because it was not only dismissive, it was false. I did not basically just do labor. I scheduled jobs, managed crews, negotiated supplier prices, tracked expenses, covered payroll when my dad was swamped, handled angry clients when timelines slipped, fixed mistakes before clients ever knew they existed, kept projects moving when materials were late, made sure the people swinging the hammers actually had somewhere to swing them. But Dylan did not know any of that, because he had never bothered to ask, and because my parents had never bothered to correct him. That hurt more than I expected. Not because Dylan underestimated me. He had been doing that my whole life. What stung was watching my parents let him, watching them sit there, knowing how much I carried, and still looking at him like maybe he had a point. My dad cleared his throat. Well, running a business takes experience. Dylan grinned. How hard could it be? Then he said the sentence that changed everything. If I were in charge, this company would be making twice as much money. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I smiled. Not an angry smile, not a bitter one, just calm. Because in that exact moment, a very simple idea came to me. If Dylan truly believed the business was easy, then maybe the most honest thing in the world will be to let him prove it. So I leaned back in my chair and said the one thing nobody at that table expected. You know what? Maybe you should run it. Silence. My mom blinked. My dad looked at me, like he was trying to see whether I was joking. But Dylan's face lit up immediately. See? He said, pointing at me like he had just won a debate. Even Jake knows I could do it. I took a slow sip of water to hide the fact that I almost smiled, because what Dylan did not understand was this. Running the business was never the easy part. Keeping it alive was. And if he wanted control so badly, I was more than willing to step aside and let him put his confidence to work. Because sometimes the fastest way to teach someone a lesson is not to argue with them. It is to hand them the keys. The strange thing about reckless confidence is that, now and then, people reward it. And 2 weeks after that dinner, my parents did exactly that. It happened on a Tuesday morning. I was at the shop by 6:15 like usual, unlocking tool storage, checking the whiteboard, reviewing job assignments, and trying to figure out whether we could squeeze in a small fence repair Friday without throwing off a kitchen timeline. The shop smelled the way it always did in the morning. Sawdust, oil, cheap coffee, cold air sneaking under the bay door. The crew filtered in one by one. Tommy first, half awake and already complaining. Then Marcus and Leo, arguing about football like their lives depended on it. Normal sounds. Normal morning. Then my dad walked into the office before 7. That alone told me something was off. Dad was usually there around 8, unless something was wrong. He stood in the doorway for a second, watching me go over the schedule board. Then he cleared his throat. Jake. I looked up. Yeah? He rubbed the back of his neck. You remember what Dylan said at dinner? I leaned back. Hard to forget. Dad nodded slowly. Your mom and I talked about it. My stomach tightened immediately, because there are certain sentences that only ever lead to trouble. That was one of them. And he hesitated. He thinks he could bring some new ideas into the company. Of course he did. Dylan always had ideas. Ideas were his specialty. Ideas are light, cheap, portable. You can carry 100 of them without breaking a sweat. Results are heavier. Dad kept going, picking his words carefully, like Maybe softer wording would change what they meant. We thought maybe it wouldn't hurt to let him try managing things for a while. I stared at him for a while, just to see what he can do. Part of me wanted to laugh. Part of me wanted to ask if 32 years of my father building something had really come down to a dinner table speech from a man who thought permits were probably optional paperwork. And part of me, the part that had smiled at dinner, was curious. Because now it was real. So, you want Dylan running the company? Dad lifted a hand. No, not running it. Then he paused, just long enough to make it worse. Just overseeing operations, which, translated into plain English, meant running it. And what exactly am I supposed to be doing? You'd still handle the crews and job sites. Of course, the hard parts. The dirty parts. The parts where mistakes cost real money. The parts Dylan had always floated above. I nodded slowly. That sounds about right. Dad studied me. You're not upset? I looked back at the schedule board. No, why would I be? And strangely enough, I meant it. Because deep down, I already knew something my parents still hadn't figured out. Dylan did not understand the business. Not the rhythm, not the risk. Not the way one late payment could choke 3 active jobs. Not the way a small scheduling mistake could ripple across an entire month. Not the way crews, clients, suppliers, inspectors, permits, weather, and cash flow all had to move together like gears in a machine nobody noticed until one tooth snapped. By 9 o'clock, Dylan arrived. Late. Naturally, wearing sunglasses and carrying coffee from some overpriced place downtown. He walked into the shop like he was stepping into a startup he had just acquired. "Morning, gentlemen," he said. Tommy looked at Marcus and whispered, "Why is he dressed like a nightclub manager?" Marcus shrugged. "Maybe he thinks steel-toe boots are a mindset." Dad called everyone together by the workbench. "Listen up," he said. "Small announcement." The room settled. Dylan is going to be helping manage the business for a while. Silence. Real silence. The kind where nobody says what they are thinking because they assume they heard wrong. Then Dylan stepped forward with a grin that belonged on a conference stage. "I'm bringing some modern thinking into the company," he said. "Better marketing, better pricing strategy, more efficiency." Leo leaned toward me. "Does he know what we actually do?" I kept my face straight. "No." Dylan clapped his hands once. "First thing we're doing is streamlining operations." Tommy frowned. "What does that mean?" Dylan smiled. "It means we're going to work smarter, not harder." Tommy nodded slowly, then muttered to Marcus, "That means he has no idea." The first few days were almost entertaining. Dylan spent most of his time in the office chair scrolling through spreadsheets he did not understand, with the confidence of a man who believed squinting at numbers counted as financial management. He watched business podcasts, read articles about entrepreneurial leadership, started saying words like scaling, positioning, and leveraging visibility. One morning, he pulled me aside and said, "You know what this company really needs?" "What?" "Branding." I looked at him. "Branding." He nodded excitedly. "We need social media, stronger identity, maybe some digital ad funnels." I stared at him for a second. "Dylan, we build decks and fences." He waved that away. "That's the old mindset." Meanwhile, the actual business kept moving. Jobs had to be scheduled. Materials had to be ordered. Clients needed updates. Permits had to be approved before certain work could begin. Employees needed direction. Vendors needed answers. None of that paused because Dylan had discovered podcasts. Normally, I handled most of it. Now Dylan wanted to optimize workflow. The first sign of trouble came fast. Tommy walked into the office holding a schedule sheet and wearing the face of a man trying not to swear in front of family. "Jake," he said, "this doesn't make sense." I took the paper. 3 crews had been assigned across 2 sites with overlapping times and impossible travel windows. One team was expected to be on the west side of town at 8, and somehow also unloading materials across town at 8:30. "Who made this?" Tommy asked. Dylan leaned back in the chair proudly. "I did." Tommy stared at him. "You scheduled 6 guys for the same job." "Efficiency," Dylan said. Tommy blinked. "No. Efficiency would be not having half the company burn gas driving in circles." Dylan smiled, like Tommy just didn't get innovation. "Trust me, I know what I'm doing." That was the moment I understood the real problem. Dylan did not just think the job was easy. He thought everyone before him had been doing it wrong. And people like that do not learn from advice. They learn from impact. Over the next few weeks, the mistakes started stacking up. At first, they were small enough to fix. A raw material order here, a late start there, a confused crew assignment, an unreturned client call. But in construction, small mistakes do not stay small for long. A raw material order delays one project. That delay shifts a crew. That crew shift affects another client. That client pushes back a payment. That payment delay affects cash flow. And cash flow is oxygen. You do not notice it until somebody starts choking. Then the complaints started. A deck project delayed 3 days. A fence install missing hardware. A kitchen renovation scheduled before permits were approved. Normally, I would have stepped in quickly, fixed things, soothed clients, and cleaned up the mess before Dad even knew there was one. But every time I tried to explain something, Dylan cut me off with the same line. "Relax, Jake." So eventually, I did. Not because I wanted the company to fail, because I wanted the truth to become visible. There is a difference. I handled what Dad directly asked me to handle. I ran the crews, kept my jobs moving, but I stopped chasing behind Dylan with a broom and dustpan every time his ego knocked something over. At home, my parents still thought things were promising. Dylan came to dinner talking about growth strategy, about taking Harrison and Sons to the next level, about expanding services and increasing visibility and creating a stronger market presence. My mom looked proud. My dad looked hopeful. And I sat there listening, thinking the same thing every night. You can tell who understands a business by the things they brag about. People who know the work talk about margins, timelines, risk, labor, and delivery. People who do not know the work talk about big moves. Then Dylan made one, a huge one. One afternoon, he came into the shop carrying a folder like he was bringing in a winning lottery ticket. "I've got huge news," he announced. The crew gathered around, mostly because they had already learned that Dylan's announcements were never boring. "What is it?" Marcus asked. Dylan grinned. "I just signed our biggest contract ever." The room went quiet. "How big?" Tommy asked. 3 apartment buildings. Full renovation. Marcus's eyebrows lifted. "That's a lot." "Exactly," Dylan said. Then he dropped the line that made my stomach sink. "I promised the developer we could start in 2 weeks. Marcus slowly turned and looked at me. I already knew the problem. We did not have the crews. We did not have the available schedule. We did not have the materials lined up. And most importantly, we did not have room for a mistake that size. But Dylan did not know any of that. Because he had confused landing a deal with being able to deliver one. And those are not the same thing. Not even close. The first real warning siren did not come from the client. It came from the lumber yard. Monday morning. Gray, Ohio sky. Cold enough that Every breath looked irritated. I was loading tools into a truck when Marcus came up holding his phone with that look he gets when something stupid has become expensive. "Jake," he said, "did Dylan forget to pay the lumberyard again?" I froze. "Again?" Marcus held up the screen. "Manager says they won't release our order until last month's invoice is paid." That order covered 3 deck builds scheduled that week. No lumber meant no decks. No decks meant no progress. No progress meant no invoice. No invoice meant no money. I went into the office. Dylan was behind Dad's desk with his feet up, scrolling through his laptop like he was between TED Talks. Marcus spoke first. "The lumberyard says we're on hold." Dylan barely looked concerned. "Yeah, I saw that." Marcus stared. "You saw it?" "Yeah. And?" Dylan gave a relaxed shrug. "I'm managing cash flow." Marcus looked at me, then back at him. "What does that mean?" "It means I delayed some payments to keep capital available." There it was, the sentence. The one that told me he still thought this business worked like a theory. This was construction, not a venture-backed startup. Suppliers do not care about your confidence. They care whether the wire clears, I said carefully. If we don't pay them, they don't release materials. They will eventually, Dylan said. Marcus shook his head. They already didn't, unquote. Dylan sighed, like the supplier was the unreasonable one. Then he opened his laptop and sent the payment. Moments later, Marcus's phone buzzed. They want confirmation before they release anything. Dylan frowned. They're being dramatic. Marcus turned and walked out without answering. Because there are some conversations where the dumbest thing in the room is not the person. It is continuing the conversation. 2 days later, the apartment contract blew open. Tommy came into the shop holding a clipboard, like it might bite him. "You've got to be kidding me." Marcus looked up. "What now?" Tommy flipped the paper around. "Apartment project. Developer says we're supposed to start demolition today." Everything stopped, because we all knew we were nowhere near ready. "What did you tell them?" I asked. Tommy pointed at the contract. "I told them we're not set. They told me Dylan signed a start date." I went straight into the office. Dylan was on the phone, laughing loudly, using the phrase future expansion footprint like he was being paid by the syllable. He hung up when he saw my face. "What?" I set the contract on the desk. "We're scheduled to start the apartment project today." He nodded like I had confirmed excellent news. "Yeah, we can't start today." "Sure we can." "No, we can't." He leaned back. "Jake, you're thinking small." I stared at him. "Small? This project puts us on the map." I rubbed my forehead. "We're already booked. We don't have the crews. Then move the other jobs." That one sentence told me he still did not understand the first thing about construction management. You do not just move jobs. There are permits, inspection windows, client timelines, material deliveries, crew availability, subcontractor coordination. A construction schedule is not a stack of sticky notes. It is a chain, and every link matters. But Dylan did not know that, because Dylan had never had to know that. Then the bleeding accelerated. 2 employees quit in 1 week, not because they hated the work, because they were tired of chaos. Marcus caught a wrong insulation order for the apartment job. A supplier refused to extend our credit. A kitchen client threatened to cancel after 3 missed deadlines and 1 broken promise. At dinner, my mom still said things like, "Big changes take time." Dylan nodded. Dad tried to believe that. I said very little. because the truth had passed the adjustment phase. This was not growing pain. This was collapse, wearing a nice shirt. 3 weeks after Dylan took control, the number finally surfaced. I walked into the office one morning and saw Dad sitting at the desk with a stack of invoices in his hand. He looked older, not generally older, suddenly older, like the last few weeks had reached inside him and pulled something down. "Jake," he said quietly. I stepped in. "What's wrong?" He handed me the papers. Unpaid invoices, suppliers, equipment rental, materials, outstanding balances. I turned to the last page and saw the total. $147,000. The number hit me in the chest, not because I did not know things were bad, because now they had shape. Dad rubbed his face. I didn't realize it had gotten this far. Then Dylan walked in, holding coffee and his phone, looking relaxed until he saw both of us. "What's going on?" Dad looked up at him and asked, very quietly, "How did the business get this close to bankruptcy?" For the first time since this started, Dylan had no performance ready. No grin, no slogan, no speech, just a blink. Then another. "Bankruptcy?" he said slowly, almost like the word was exaggerated. Dad nodded. "Yes." Dylan gave a short laugh. "Dad, come on." He took the invoices and started flipping through them. At first, his face looked irritated, then confused, then tight. "These are supplier invoices," he said. Marcus, who had stopped in the doorway, answered for Dad. "Exactly. Construction companies live and die by cash flow. You buy material first, pay labor while the work is happening, then bill out and get paid. If the cash cycle breaks, everything starts collapsing inward. Delayed payments become delayed materials. Delayed materials become delayed jobs. Delayed jobs become delayed invoices. Delayed invoices become empty accounts. And empty accounts become funerals for businesses people thought were fine last month." Dylan paced the office. "This is temporary. We just need more revenue." Marcus folded his arms. "From what jobs?" "The apartment project." Marcus looked at me. I already knew where this was going. "The one that's already 3 weeks behind?" he asked. Dylan did not answer, because that job had become poison. The developer expected action. We had no room. Materials had been delayed. Crews were tied up. And every week we failed to deliver, the contract penalties grew. Marcus looked at the contract file. "How much are the penalties?" Dylan looked at me. I answered, $20,000. Dad looked up sharply. $20,000? I nodded. Per week. Silence. Real silence. The kind that feels like the walls are listening. Dad sank back into his chair. "How much is in the account?" Dylan hesitated. Then he said it. "About 40,000. Payroll alone for the next month was almost 60. That was before materials, before rentals, before debt service, before anything else. The math did not require interpretation. The company was suffocating." Dad looked at Dylan. "What happened?" And finally, Dylan looked like a man standing in the ruins of his own confidence. "I was trying to grow the business," he said. Marcus gave a tired half-laugh. "You tried to grow it faster than it could survive." Then Dylan did what people like Dylan often do when the consequences finally arrive. He turned toward me. "You could have helped more." I stared at him. "I tried. You should have pushed harder." Marcus actually laughed this time. "Oh, that's rich." Dylan's voice rose. "This isn't just my fault." And technically, he was right. My parents had handed him authority. They had mistaken confidence for competence. They had ignored every warning sign because they liked how leadership sounded when it came out of his mouth. But none of that changed the core truth. Dylan signed the contracts. Dylan delayed the payments. Dylan made the decisions. And for the first time in his life, he was standing in a mess he could not charm his way out of. The next week was grim. Employees whispered. Suppliers called non-stop. The same question moved through the shop like smoke. Are we going under? Dad spent hours trying to negotiate with the bank, trying to keep the credit line alive, trying to delay what could be delayed, trying to keep 32 years from ending with a locked gate and an empty lot. And Dylan changed. The motivational speeches disappeared. The trendy business vocabulary disappeared. The confidence did not vanish completely, but it cracked. Instead of talking, he started staring at spreadsheets. Instead of declaring solutions, he started looking for exits. One evening, after everybody left, I found him alone in the shop. The sun was down. Only the light over the workbench was on. He did not look up when I came in. I didn't think it would be like this, he said. I leaned against the doorway. Like what? He looked around the shop. At the tools, the job board, the trucks, the stacks of paperwork he used to think were just clutter. I thought the hard part was the labor. I let that sit for a second. Then I said, no. Running a business is not about swinging a hammer. It is about money, timing, risk, people, promises. It is about making one decision and knowing 6 other things might break because of it. It is about carrying pressure nobody sees so everybody else can keep working. Dylan looked down. What are we going to do? There was only one honest answer left. Dad may have to sell the company. His head lifted sharply. Sell it? Or bring in investors? The words landed hard. Because if that happened, Harrison and Sons would still exist on paper. But it would not really be ours anymore. And the thing Dylan had grabbed for so casually would be gone. For a long time, he said nothing. And the strange part was, I was not angry. Not anymore. Because revenge had already happened. I had not sabotaged him. I had not trapped him. I had not set him up. I had only done one thing. I had agreed with him. For the first time in his life, Dylan was truly quiet. Not because he was planning his next argument, because he had finally run out of one. The next week felt like waiting for bad weather you could already smell. Every phone call sounded worse than the last. Suppliers wanted payment. The apartment developer wanted answers. The bank wanted real numbers. Construction companies are built on trust. Clients trust you to finish. Suppliers trust you to pay. Employees trust you to keep checks coming. And once trust starts cracking, everything else follows. Thursday morning, Dad called both of us into the office. We sat across from him like kids waiting for a sentence. He looked exhausted, not just tired, drained. I spoke to the bank, he said. Neither of us spoke. They're not extending the credit line. No surprise there. Banks do not rescue businesses that look like they are setting themselves on fire. Dad slid a paper across the desk. At the bottom was one number. $212,000. That's what it will take to stabilize everything, he said. Without that money, the company would collapse within weeks. Dylan rubbed his forehead. We'll figure something out. Dad shook his head. No, we won't. Then he looked directly at him. There are 2 options. Sell the company or bring in investors. Dylan straightened. We're not selling. Dad did not even respond to that. Because Dylan no longer had the authority to talk like that. Not after this. I leaned back in my chair. For the first time in days, I spoke. There is a third option. Both of them looked at me. Dad frowned. What? I shrugged. Let Dylan keep running it. Dylan turned to me, like I had lost my mind. Dad stared. You're serious? Yes. The company is about to collapse. I know. Dylan let out a nervous laugh. That's not funny. I looked at him steadily. You said running the business was easy, and that was the line that finally stripped everything away. Because this time, he had no answer, no comeback, no speech, nothing. Dad looked between us. I don't understand what you're suggesting. Let him handle the negotiations, I said. The bank, the suppliers, the developer. Let him fix the mess he created. Dad sat back, slowly. Then, to my surprise, he nodded. You're right. Dylan looked at him. Wait. Dad held up a hand. You wanted control. Now carry it. That changed everything. The next few weeks were brutal for Dylan. He spent hours on the phone with suppliers, trying to negotiate payment plans. Some agreed, some did not. He met with the apartment developer and tried to reduce penalties. That meeting lasted 3 hours. When he came back, he looked like someone had sanded the shine off him. The bank meeting was worse. Banks do not care about charisma. They do not care about vision. They care about numbers, risk, and whether the person across the table understands the damage already done. For the first time in his life, Dylan had to sit in a room where confidence alone had no exchange rate. And while he was doing that, I kept doing what I had always done. Running crews, managing jobs, holding things together. But something had changed. Dylan stopped telling me what to do. He started asking real questions. How do you build these schedules? How do you keep suppliers from getting nervous? How do you know when a client is about to become a problem? How do you balance 3 active jobs without killing the crews? That was the first time I saw something useful in him. Humility. It did not make him likable overnight. It did not erase what happened, but it made him teachable. One evening, we sat at the workbench after everyone else had gone home. Same shop, same dim light, same place where this whole lesson had finally caught up with him. He looked at me and said, I owe you an apology. I kept tightening a bolt on a toolbox latch. For what? For acting like your job was easy. For acting like you were easy to replace. That one landed, because it was closer to the real wound. I looked up. Running the company isn't the hardest part. He frowned. What is? Keeping it alive. He nodded slowly, and for once, he did not try to add anything smarter on top of that. 6 months later, the company was still standing. Barely, but standing. The apartment project finished late. The supplier debt came down. The bank approved a smaller credit extension after enough damage control to make everybody miserable. Most importantly, the employees stayed. That mattered more than almost anything, because crews know when a company is rotten. And if they stay, it usually means they still trust somebody inside the building. One night, at dinner, my mom asked Dylan the question that had been hanging over all of us for months. So, she said carefully, do you still think running the company is easy? Dylan laughed. Not the old laugh. Not the one full of swagger and easy certainty. This one sounded tired, honest, a little ashamed, not even a little. Then he looked at me. And Jake is the reason it survived. The room went still. My dad nodded. You both are. Maybe that was the closest thing to fairness our family was ever going to get. Not perfect recognition. Not some movie speech about all the years they overlooked me. Just the truth, finally said out loud where everybody could hear it. And honestly, that was enough. Because every now and then, somebody still asks me the same question. Did you know Dylan would fail when you let him take over? And the answer is simple. I did not have to sabotage him. I did not have to expose him. I did not have to prove anything. All I did was give him exactly what he wanted. And sometimes that is the most satisfying revenge of all.